I'm trying to find a quiet room to be in, like this one. Okay. Add call.
This is for a radio project or this for a school project? What is this for?
Both. So I'm taking a radio journalism class, and we've been assigned to do a project on trigger warnings. And my section of the project is to talk about kind of what a trigger warning is, and because there seems to be some confusion about that, and so I've been calling people and talking to them about it. And I found your piece online, and I was like, wow, this is really good.
Thanks.
This is really great. Like, I thought it was a kind of intricate discussion of like how trigger warnings are used, and so I was hoping that I could talk to you about that. And
Sure. Yeah. No. Go ahead. Yeah. Ask away. I'll give you whatever information I can. I'm not an expert, but I have my experiences. So.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I guess to start out, before we start, I will say that I'm recording the call, obviously, because it's a radio program, or
right.
for a radio thing. And I plan on putting the final piece on SoundCloud.
Okay. Okay, great.
And I can send you a link and all that if you like.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think I just have to say that kind of stuff. But
yes, you do. Yeah.
So to start off, could you state your name and profession?
My name is Rani Newtill, and I'm a former professor of race, gender, and sexuality in film and literature, and I am now working at a startup.
Oh, what startup?
It's a startup called Coach Up. It's a marketplace that connects private coaches to athletes.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. So my first question is, how would you define a trigger warning?
Well, as I stated, I'm not an expert, but I did work for my local rape crisis center, and from my understanding, I think this began in chat rooms and, online first, but I could be wrong about that. But from what, we were given in the 40-hour training I received to become a rape crisis counselor, it's basically an alert to content and material that could be presented or read, of course, if it was online, that could trigger someone who had experiences related to that disturbing content. Or not, just disturbing content in terms of sexual violence or violence,
Yeah. No, definitely. It seems it's a kind of a warning, like a content advisory kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. Except there's not a, 18 and older kind of thing to it, and that's a joke. Yeah.
Right. Do you see a difference between trigger warnings and safe spaces?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think. Well, first of all, I don't believe in safe spaces. I just don't think they exist. I mean, I think classrooms, and that's not to say I don't think that classrooms should, strive to be, or we shouldn't strive to make classrooms safe spaces, depending on what that means, and depending on what the class is. I think if the class is designed to make you uncomfortable, then you radically change what a safe space means. So safe spaces, if you look about the landscape of our country, there's no such thing as a safe space, right? So
right.
The university becomes a hub or a bubble where we're trying to create these things that don't exist, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Do you think that might be a kind of, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, is it possible that safe spaces and trigger warnings, they do have a legitimate purpose, and that they've kind of been blown out of proportion and used for much more than they're intended originally to be used for? Like, they're no longer just for survivors. They're now kind of being used for anything that makes people uncomfortable.
I kind of brought up this example in the article about that Duke student who didn't want to read Bechdel's, I think, memoir because it has lesbian sex in it. So if we were to go to that student and say, why do you not want to read it? I think it was religious belief. Honestly, it's been so long since I've been engaged in any classroom type politics. I think it's been over a year that I'm not versed anymore. But I think the sentiment around his desire not to read that text might be exactly the same certain sort of gestures towards what people are going to read or not read in a classroom, that we see going on nationally, right? And then if you think of it that way, then the students who are liberals, which I am as well, I grew up in the 90s, one of the products of, women and gender studies and race studies. I got my PhD in ethnic studies, committed to social change and justice. But I suppose I just didn't imagine that the work that we were doing in the 90s would land where we are now. And so, the parallel between sort of censorship that you see, let's say a white Christian male wanting in his classroom with some of the stuff that happened in my class is a little, it's sad. It's just sad. That's my biggest response to it at this point,
Right. Yeah, it's upsetting, I think.
Yeah.
A little bit more than sad.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you have collateral damage in the form of professors who are liberal, who are trying to teach things that I think are going to change, students' worldview, not, it does get sort of, it's upsetting. So, I mean, I don't want to say that, kids are oversensitive or any of those things. Part of me thinks it's an identity crisis. I think the term survivor has become an identity that, is much like a racial identity. And that can be very problematic, especially if survivors are white and, are cis and all those things that if we're going to blur the lines between all of these things, and we need to think about the hierarchy of the world and especially the hierarchy of the world outside classrooms, because I'm sorry, no matter what you are as an identity, once you enter, and I think we're talking about really, really elite institutions when we're talking about these debates, once you enter the gates of Yale or Harvard, there is a level of privilege that you've adopted, and that has to be recognized. So,
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, yeah, yeah. Um, just for context, you've mentioned a couple times your class. Do you think you could just? I got kicked out of the classroom that I was sitting in because there's a class coming in. So
Okay,
now
no
I'm in the
problem.
hallway and it's a little bit loud. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Um,
No worries.
but so just for context, do you think you could tell me briefly about your experience with trigger warnings in the class? Kind of like a little bit of what you talked about in the article.
Sure. So I was teaching a class called Sex and Cinema, and at the same time I was asked to fill in for the Director of Sexual Assault Prevention Services. She was on leave. So I basically was doing two things. I was transitioning out of academia in its traditional sense because I couldn't find a tenure track job. That's sort of the other thing going on in higher ed, which is the transformation of, what teaching looks like, right? What professors' roles and positions look like. And so I thought I was going to go into student services. I've always been, someone who wants to work with college students and, social change. And that basically turned out to be a bad thing. So, teaching a class called Sex and Cinema while being a sexual assault prevention services, it should have seemed like it was a recipe for disaster. Because I, as a professor, really wanted to explore difficult issues like race, Black masculinity, desire, and it's in all its complexity. And as a sexual assault prevention services person, you teach that consent is very black and white. But when you're teaching it from the standpoint of literature or film, then you see that desire is not so black and white, which we know.
Right.
But that's not something that really jives with the whole sexual assault prevention work. And that's the problem, because when you want to fight, sexual violence, it has to be black and white. But when you're thinking about desire from, the standpoint of representation in film or literature, it becomes completely different, right? But I'll take like an example of, I think I talk about it in the article. I'm teaching a film where the woman, it's sort of an S&M relationship, and, she does want to be dominated, but the students in the class are saying she's being raped every time, which isn't true. And my whole thought process during that whole entire time in the classroom was, what if there's a woman in the class who has rape fantasies? Is she feeling slut-shamed? And that's obviously not something I think these students, intended for, but we're doing. So, not just women, anyone. So my class really blew up in my face. I gave trigger warnings for everything. I gave trigger warnings first before I showed a scene. I gave trigger warnings then, through emails the night before about what I would be showing. I had students crying, leaving my class. I kind of kowtowed too much to these students, and it eventually was the last thing. After teaching I got my PhD in 2007, but I began teaching in 2005. So after teaching for almost a decade, I just left.
That was it. That was your final straw.
I mean, that in combination with not wanting to move anymore, I got offered a job at a liberal arts college near me for a year. So I did get offered a job, and, I thought to myself, it was another elite institution. I really kind of at that point, after teaching at really, really elite institutions, kind of wanted to teach at a state school, but because my friends who do, a state school, like a commuter school, I should say, like UMass Boston, and they don't pay very well in terms of unless you get a full-time lecturing position, and there were only a few classes here and there that it wasn't going to pay the bills. Waitressing paid better. But I did get offered a year position, at a liberal arts college that paid well, and I just thought, what am I going to do after this year? What am I going to do with my life? And when am I going to move? And my partner, who's now my husband, at the time was like, we have to think about this because we keep moving. I had been moving every 2 years since 2005. So I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And I miss it. Don't get me wrong. I miss it a lot.
Mm.
But I just, yeah, it was the choice I made for a bunch of reasons. And one of them definitely was not wanting to deal with what I had gone through.
Yeah. No, that sounds kind of difficult. The moving especially actually sounds pretty difficult. It's hard to keep switching locations and going back and forth. And yeah, I
Yeah.
can understand that.
Yeah.
I guess so. I only have a couple more minutes before my next class starts, but I've I guess two more questions. One is how do you feel about rebranding trigger warnings to content advisory notices, like similar to what you see in front of movie trailers, like this isn't appropriate for children under 13 or that kind of thing, just because the word trigger warning seems to have been, appropriated into this entirely different, like, sphere of talking.
Right. I'm not really aware of what's going on with the rebranding. I think you probably find that it just has the same exact, just because, you name something different doesn't mean it's not the same thing. So, I don't know. And I think, my fundamental belief is that if you're taking a class that is designed to make you uncomfortable, then you should be aware that that's the trigger warning or that's the content advisory warning from the get-go. So,
Mm-hmm. So, like, there are cases. Would you say that, like, there are cases where a trigger warning is appropriate to use, or is
yeah.
it's mostly common sense?
Well, no, of course, I mean, if you're going to take a class called Sex and Cinema, you best believe you're going to see some stuff that's going to disturb you. But if you're going to take a physics class about, the galaxy, and all of a sudden the professor's showing a rape scene, then I'm pretty sure you're going to want a content advisory notice, right? It's all context specific. Everything is always context specific. So yeah, I mean, if it's going to come out of nowhere, definitely give a warning. But if it's not, because you signed up, and that's academic freedom. You as a student have signed up to take this class, and you as a student have the right to not take that class too. So if you feel uncomfortable, that's why professors are allowed to teach Lolita, right?
Right.
Because you have a choice to take the class. But if you're taking the class, you should be doing the work.
Yeah. I think one of the best arguments that I've heard for using trigger warnings is that you don't allow the students to get out of doing the work by saying that there's a trigger warning, but instead you use the trigger warning as a way for the students to prepare for the reading, to like take their Xanax or their a medication or however that's what they need, and so that they can like then not have like an emotional breakdown or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess I just experienced it the opposite, that the students they avoided doing the watching of the film based on the content advisory or the trigger warning. So,
Right. So in practice,
yeah.
it doesn't really work that way.
In my experience, no, it was the reason not to do it. I mean, if you're going to take a class that, let's say, is about slavery, and then you're going to get disturbed that there's images of lynching, it's a little bit of common sense, right? So,
yeah.
So, yeah. So, for me, like I said, it's all content specific.
Mhm.
Context specific. Like, what is this class about? There's a description of the course. That is the content of the course, right?
Right.
So,
All right. Great. I gotta run. I'm sorry that I have to cut it a little bit short, but
thanks so much, and good luck with your project. and class.
Yeah. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
I really
Okay.
appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
No problem at all. All
I
right.
should
Take care
be
of yourself.
done with it all by about Monday, so
Okay.
I can
All
send
right.
you
Well,
a
I
link
hope
if
so.
you'd like.
Okay, great. And I hope the class comes up with some interesting stuff. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
All
Good
right.
luck. Bye.
Bye.